Good evening, good evening. Thrilled to see such a great crowd this evening. I will tell you, we are living out our new name for our gatherings here in Wichita, Murdock Mixology. The wonderful Tony Gates was inspired by this new title that it's mix and we need to mix it up, and where we've been meeting and where we've been going, that just feels a little stale. So you are nibbling on little fish Seattle treats, and we had you in a new place for cocktails. And any of you who are not staying for dinner, you might reconsider and change your mind, because we are going to Pike's Place Market upstairs in Seattle, and we are dining at the Harbor View Cafe. Of course, we do have that wonderful view of waterfront. So we have transformed the Esgym and Darla Farha Great Hall into Seattle Pike's Place Market, just so that you're aware. In honor, of course, of our speaker, and transitioning to that, we are gearing up to create our own quite stupendous art garden. Our building is architecturally impressive. It's a Edward Larrabee Barnes building with the Sam Fry addition, and our grounds will soon also be impressive. And we've recently contracted with a really spectacular firm. It was a stiff competition and tough choice, but we've chosen, and you are all shortly to get your newsletter where you will be able to read a little bit more about this, but we've chosen a design firm called Confluence, and they have offices in Kansas City, Des Moines, and Minneapolis. And they really wowed us, both by the landscape architects that were part of their team and the urban planners, but also because they reached out to bring other people to the group of people that would be working with us to design our art garden, including an environmental artist, Vicki Scurry, and that might be a name that's familiar to some of you because the Douglas Avenue Bridge, or Douglas Street Bridge, is a project that she's done already in Wichita, and she's also working on the Kellogg extension, basically from Rock Road to Andover. Really spectacular artist, and a lighting designer who's based in Kansas City, but he teaches at the Pratt School of Art and Design in New York City additionally. So it's just, they created what we came to call the A-Team, and we're really excited about working with that group. I wanted to share that we have an art garden committee of people close to the museum who are helping us with the conversation back and forth with the designers, and includes our own Marty Walker, who's with us this evening, and Paula Downing, and Jeff Kennedy, and Mike Michaelis, and Elizabeth Stevenson. And we have an oversight consultant, Jeff Van Sickle, who's also a Murdock Society member, one of the leaders of the architecture firm GLMV here in town. So I just feel like we are in such good hands. The design itself is happening as we speak, and by midsummer we should have the design complete, and we will be turning dirt next spring, so right around this time next year, and construction will happen through the summer, and we will all be at a fabulous party in October to celebrate this new garden. So as all of that was happening for us, it just made sense with our Murdock gatherings this year to look across a broader horizon and learn about some of the really spectacular projects for sculpture gardens, art parks, sculpture parks that have been happening in recent years elsewhere in the country. So many of us were here a month ago when Jeff Fleming, the director of the Des Moines Art Center, came and talked about the very new Papa John Sculpture Park in that city. And for me, one of the clear, immediate choices to have someone talk about a sculpture park, a recent sculpture park, was someone from the Seattle Art Museum, because their new Olympic sculpture park is it's just epic. I don't know how many of you have seen it yet, and hopefully those of you who haven't, you'll be inspired by the presentation this evening and you'll get out there. And we were so lucky that the impressive Deputy Director Chiyo Ishikawa, when I emailed her to say, would you, she said, well, sure, that sounds like fun, I'll come out. She's a former compatriot during the short period of time that I worked at the Tacoma Art Museum, so in the Pacific Northwest overall. And it's always such a reward of my job when I get to bring people that I know from anywhere else and bring them to Kansas to make them more aware of the spectacular home that we have and what we're doing here in Kansas in Wichita. Chiyo has really lived the bulk of her professional career at SAM, we call it. We're, here at the Wichita Art Museum, we're RAM. Well, she's SAM, the Seattle Art Museum. She had early stints as a junior staffer at the Museum of Fine Arts Boston and at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. She landed a foot on the curatorial ladder in Seattle over 20 years ago and really has risen to her current position of Deputy Director for Art. She's done really a range of amazing exhibitions, many of them international over that time, from Picasso to Victorian photographs, from French Impressionism to the modern painter, Seattle-based painter Morris Graves. The depth of her own personal scholarship is in Renaissance European art history, and most especially Renaissance and pre-Renaissance Spain. I would ask you, how many people do you know who have received a royal European honor? Well, Chiyo has. The King Juan Carlos of Spain awarded Chiyo the Royal Order of Isabella, which I think used to be a kind of honorary favor to his friendship group, and it has segued, and it's now for merit, and that's based on the depth of work that she's done on historic Spanish artists. She's curated a number of major international exhibitions with accompanying scholarly publications. She's published a book on the Spanish artist Juan de Flandes and Miquel Cito. I don't know if my Spanish accent is so great. I'm sure it's not. My language, foreign language, is German. And fascinatingly to me, she shared her resume in advance, and it focuses on her scholarship. But I happen to know Chiyo's a real art star, and she's done some very heavy lifting for the Seattle Art Museum. And during the time that she's been there, she is the survivor of at least 4 museum directors that I'm aware of, and that says nothing about the interim directors. During that tenure, Seattle Art Museum opened a new building in downtown. They then turned around and they closed their original building. That's a beautiful Art Deco building in Volunteer Park, and they did a major renovation and brought it back. Building a new building downtown wasn't quite enough. They then expanded it, probably more than double the size of the original building. And in the same year that they opened that expansion, they also opened the Olympic Sculpture Park. And she was a major part of all of that and a major part of the Olympic Sculpture Park. So she was really the perfect person that we needed to hear from. Clearly, I could continue at length talking about the accomplishments of Chiyo. Rather that, let's welcome her to the stage.
Thank you, Patricia, and thank you, everybody, for the warm welcome that you've given me. I'm really happy to be here. I was delighted when Patricia invited me. We still miss her in the Pacific Northwest. She did really great work while she was in Tacoma, and I know she's doing great work here. I told some of you that I was really happy to be in Wichita and to be in Kansas for personal reasons, and it's kind of surprising given my Japanese name, but I actually have family roots here in Kansas because my mother's family is German, and her last name was Brandhorst, and she, when she grew up, was living in two tiny Kansas towns, Sylvan Grove and Bremen. So I know all her childhood stories of dusty Kansas in the 30s. And so I'm very, very happy to be here. And I'm very happy to tell you about the Olympic Sculpture Park, which is one of the greatest things that I've had the pleasure of being involved with. And I certainly was not one of the main instigators, but we are all about the team in Seattle, as you are here. And this was a great enterprise that took shape very quickly, and I think we bought the land in 1999. We opened the park in 2007, and it has become, in the 7 years since then, a real civic treasure, and we're extremely proud of it. It's also a site, one of our 3 sites. Our original building, which Patricia mentioned, is now the Asian Art Museum and Volunteer Park, and then we have our flagship downtown building, and then we have the Olympic Sculpture Park. And the Olympic Sculpture Park is free to everybody, just as a park is, and that makes us really happy that we can share an experience of art and the environment with a broader public. So here is the evocative view from the top of the park with Alexander Calder's eagle, which is really the kind of heartbeat of the park, looking west to the Olympic Mountains. Seattle, if any of you have been there, you know that it's a very vibrant urban center, but it also is situated amidst natural beauty. We're between 2 mountain ranges, and we have water everywhere. So there are vistas galore. But we hadn't, until this moment, been able to harness them as part of the urban experience. Here is an overview of the city of Seattle. So you can see the water. This is Elliott Bay here, Lake Union. There's another lake over here. This is the downtown core. Seattle Art Museum is right about there. But you see, as you look around, there's not a lot of green space. This was not a city that was designed like Washington, D.C., or St. Louis, or Kansas City with great green spaces that were planned into the civic experience. And so when this little spot that I've outlined on the screen was identified, that was the last remaining waterfront parcel in Seattle that still could be developed. And when we found out about it, I mean, the options were we could buy it, or a developer could buy it and turn it into condominiums and swallow up another bit of the shore. So we had been thinking of, let's see what the next slide is. Whoops. Here's the beautiful site. So let me tell you how this unpromising site became a beautiful park. There had been a desire at the Seattle Art Museum to have a sculpture park for quite a while. There had been talk among some of our trustees, several of whom collected monumental outdoor sculpture, and our director, Mimi Gates, who was a very formidable and very positive, we can do it kind of person. They had been talking for a long time about wanting to have a sculpture park, and then we came in contact with somebody from the Trust for Public Land, which buys up spaces or spots, and in this case, a spot that had a very polluted history. It had been owned by the Unocal Corporation and was an oil transfer site for most of the 20th century. So it was a brown field that was cleaned up and was now available. And if we were interested in it for the sculpture park, this idea that we had, which we didn't envision in a spot like this, we would need to raise the money, or a certain portion of money, within 6 months. And so there was a big discussion at a board meeting, and after lots of yays and nays, it was decided to go forward. This is how things happened at the museum during that time. Within about 2 years, we would also decide to go forward with a very ambitious expansion project. So we had 2 enormous capital projects where initially we had planned for 1. So here is the site, and as I said, it was a brownfield that was now cleaned up, but it was a very complicated and difficult site. First of all, it was not one piece of land, but 3 pieces of land. It was this piece here, then there was a street, a busy street, then there was this little strip of land and train tracks, and then a parking lot with a trolley barn where the trolleys changed. And believe it or not, when we began to move forward, it was this trolley barn that people were most up in arms about. You can't move the trolley barn. But finally, we did, and it was moved to another location, and everything has been fine. So here were these 3 pieces of land, and we thought, well, it will really take somebody with vision to transform this into something that can be a civic asset. So we held a competition, and we invited, I think we had 52 applicants, and what we were asking was not to submit a proposal, but to submit their qualifications, examples of work that they had done in the past, why this project appealed to them. We narrowed it down to, I think, 7 finalists, and selected this young couple, Marian Weiss and Michael Manfredi, from a New York firm called Weiss Manfredi. And they were unique among the applicants. It reminds me of what Patricia was saying about the people that you'll be working with at Confluence. They had urban planning experience, they had landscape architecture experience, and they had architecture experience. They were really about thinking of projects holistically and what they meant to the larger environment. And they were fascinated by the setting. They knew something about the history of Seattle as a landscape that had been very much manipulated by human beings. And she, actually, Marian, is the daughter of a geologist. So she was very interested in the natural setting and what had been done to the earth on this site. And where other people felt that, let me go back to this slide again. Some of the designers felt like the best way that you can deal with these 3 pieces of irregular land is just to cover the whole thing with a nice big grassy stretch of land. Just cover everything up and have, use the full 9 acres, and it can be just this nice big lid. And that's not how they thought about it. They wanted to harness the urban character of the setting, the difficulty of the setting, the fact that there was I think a 40-foot slope from the highest point to the waterfront. They wanted to use all of that and make that part of the character of the park. And so this little, it's not origami, but this little paper play became emblematic of their final design, a piece of paper that is just cut in a few places, and then it can become 3-dimensional, and it can move in space, and that became the centerpiece of their plan. So here you see, so in other words, they decided to leave the street, leave the railroad as integral parts of the park experience. When we were in the middle of all the fundraising for this project, they made a video for us, and part of the soundtrack was the sound of train whistles going through, and that is part of your experience when you're there. So they began moving the earth around, and we're going to find a way to create a path that would cross over the railroad tracks and the street and tie the parcels together, and you would kind of zigzag your way down from the highest point down to the waterfront. Now, around the same time, so this image is from 2005, I told you that we also then decided to begin an expansion of our downtown building. That's a whole other story. It came about in a very precipitous way, and we just created this one massive capital campaign that involved the entire city and was ultimately very successful. The only efficiency that we had between these 2 projects was moving dirt from our downtown site to the sculpture park to build up some of the height that we needed. So we really were glad we could do that, but otherwise it was just 2 massive projects. So you can see things starting to take shape here, and it's one giant earthwork. And then what you see on the left is before and then after. So it was, and you can see how dynamic, even from in this aerial view, how dynamic the spatial experience is here. It reminds you that we're kind of we're called the Emerald City. Another name for us in the 50s was Jet City. Like you, we have a lot to do with the airplane industry, and there's something very kind of speedy and sleek about this plan. And here's another view looking from the Puget Sound east. What I don't have to show you, which I'm really sorry about, is the Space Needle is right here. The Space Needle, of course, still stands as Seattle's great landmark, and we're just about 4 blocks from Seattle Center where the Space Needle is. So we really are in the heart of downtown, and we look to the Space Needle on one side, we look to the Olympic Mountains on the other side, and we look to a very busy working port to the south. Here's another view. And on a clear day, which obviously this picture wasn't entirely clear, you can also see Mount Rainier, which looms over downtown. So this is how the park looked as we're just starting to install some work, and we'll look a little bit more at these individual sculptures shortly. Richard Serra, the Calder, Marc de Souveraud, and look how bare it looks. So when you're thinking about landscaping, it's very deceptive, because you open and you think, well, it's just so bare. We need more plantings, but it fills in pretty quickly. This is how it was right before we opened, and this is how it was on opening day. And you can see how that Z-path animates the human activity. It's not the only way that you can get through the park, but it is kind of the main thoroughfare. And people come from this corner at the northeast, and then, or southeast, and then they walk north, and then they walk back, and then they walk down. And you can see it's kind of up and down, and here is the road, and here are the railroad tracks, here is the water, here's downtown, here are the cranes. It's just a very, it's not a bucolic experience by any means. It can be a very peaceful experience and a beautiful private experience, but it is a vigorous experience for most people who come there and walk their dogs or walk their bikes through the park. So this is in 2007. Now, I said we bought the land in 1999, and between 1999 and 2007, when we opened, we had an earthquake, and that damaged seawall on this side, and so I'll talk about that a little bit. We also had a 2-year delay because the city was doing a study to see whether they wanted to, let's see if I can find it here. I guess we don't see it. We have a viaduct that runs through downtown Seattle, and they were looking at building a tunnel instead, and maybe having that go under the sculpture park that we were right in the middle of building. So we had to wait for 2 years while that study was completed. And then a smaller delay. We had a labor strike by cement workers just months before we were finished. So a project like this is sometimes beyond your control, and this was also the first time that we had really had so much involvement with government. We got a fair amount of government funding, city, state, and federal, partly because of the nature of the site and because there were transportation issues involved. But so it meant we brought somebody from the Parks Department onto our board during this process, and that was a very good thing to do, to keep those conversations very close and to keep us informed about what was the right way to proceed. So here we are. I think this really was opening day, because that's when we took these pictures of the people running through, but I remember that day as about 20 degrees, because I was standing out welcoming people at one of the entrances. But see, when I talked about the landscaping, this is now last summer, 2013, and you can see it went from that to that. And these trees down here will get very high. We planned it that way specifically because there's a developer that owns this building here, and he is going to build something, and we want to block as much of it as we can. One of the things, of course, that is an effect of this park is that the property values around it have just skyrocketed, and but on the other hand, the whole neighborhood has really kind of revived because people want to be near the park. Here you can see the train going through. And one of the things that we wanted to do, partly because of its unfortunate experience as an environmental casualty, and also recalling its original history, the original history of this site as a place where Native Americans launched their fishing boats. It was an important site for Native peoples who participated with us in the ground-breaking ceremonies and the opening day ceremonies. We really wanted to recover a sense of Native habitat, and so all of the landscaping, which was overseen by a local landscape architect working with Weiss Manfredi, involved Native plants. And we created 4 archetypal ecosystems of the Pacific Northwest in 4 different precincts. So we have the valley, which is an evergreen forest, that area that I just showed you with the tall conifers, shrubs and trees, the kind of things that we see when you come to Seattle and you go into the woods, the Douglas firs and moist, the kinds of things that grow in moist conditions. Flowering perennials, ground covers, there's a lot of mossy ground cover in this area. Then we have a grove, I'm not sure I'm going to have a picture of the grove, where we have native aspen. And that's like the Cascades, the mountain range east of Seattle has. So those are deciduous trees, and they change with the seasons. And when you're there in the summer and it's windy, they rustle with a really beautiful sound. We have 2 meadows that have grasses and wildflowers in them. And those are the ones that get the most comment from people who really wish that we would have a more manicured site, because the idea was that they would grow wild the way they do in the wild, but then what happens is that certain things take over and it gets unruly looking, and then they dry out in the summer, and so that some people aren't very happy with that. And then the shore here, where we come down to a little pocket beach and have plantings that are typical of the shoreline around Washington, and also create a habitat for salmon recovery, which ended up being part of our aim too. So we had this, the kind of thing that is not usually part of an art museum's mission, but because this park had such a relationship with the environment, improving conditions for the salmon became a big part of our thinking as we move forward. And it's not even things that you see, it's the seawall underneath the park. So let's look at the pavilion a little bit. So there's a building that anchors one corner, the corner that is kind of most closely tied to downtown Seattle. So for a lot of people, that's the first thing they see when they come to the park, although there are 7 entrances that you can enter from many directions. And it's a kind of glass, concrete, and metal modernist building. Here's a beautiful Ellsworth Kelly on one exterior wall. This is the main entrance here. And this is the back looking to the park. And you can see a big glass window and these nice red chairs. That's something that we borrowed from London parks, where you go to London parks and you can just take a chair and move it wherever you would like to. And so people use those wherever they would like to. And you can see that these are grassy tiers that can become seating for events down here. So we can have concerts down there, or I'll show you a little bit more of that in a bit. But the whole idea was that people should be able to use this park in a multitude of ways. Here's the interior of the pavilion, on the right, and on the left, the exterior at night. It's got a shimmering, what is that called? Fritted glass on the windows, and so it's got this kind of milky glow that's very beautiful in the night sky. This stairway here leads to very minimal office space, but this is the main space in the pavilion. Now, when we built this space, we agreed up and down that it would not be a space for art. It was, if you made it a space for art, it would have to be climate controlled and need all kinds of environmental conditions that would add cost. So we agreed, it wouldn't be a space for art. And then as soon as we agreed to do that, then people said, well, there's got to be some art in it. It's a building at the sculpture park. How can it not have art in it? So our solution to that has been to invite artists to do things with the main wall in the pavilion that are sculptural or not. This is a Los Angeles artist and graphic designer, Jeff McFetridge, who did this very playful kind of a blow-up bulletin board. And then the following year, we had Trenton Doyle Hancock, a Houston artist. And this was a painting that extended out beyond the window. This was everybody's favorite, Sandra Cinto, a Brazilian artist that we invited up. And she made this beautiful wall covering that is all made with silver pens. She and a team of people, she didn't do any preliminary drawing. She just got in there and started making an arced curve like that, and they were underway, and it took about 2 weeks to paint it. And then we destroyed it. As she wanted. We didn't keep it, and that's not what she was interested in. And what's there now, it just opened, is this work from our own collection by the late artist Saul LeWitt. And this is a work that we had originally installed in our 1991 building, but it was in a place that had to be demolished for the expansion. And so we haven't seen it up since then, and it takes on, it's very flat, as you can tell, but it's very interesting to see it in connection with all of the three-dimensional work in the park. And that's a wonderful thing when you bring works of art together in a changing installation or an exhibition, how they change as they're seen in relation to other works of art. So I wanted to show you some of the sculpture in the park. Now, I was trying to count because I figured you'd probably ask me. I think when we opened, we had about 15 sculptures in this 9-acre space. And so we can come back to that later, but the real anchor of the park is this great work by Alexander Calder called Eagle from 1971. And it was purchased by John and Mary Shirley with the idea of us building a sculpture park before we knew what we were going to do. But they bought it for us. We installed it in front of our building in Volunteer Park, and then it was the first sculpture to be installed here. It was the first sculpture to be sited. When all of those architects and designers submitted their designs or their ideas about the park, they always had the Calder Eagle in there. That was the one constant. And you can see how it commands the view and organizes people's experience when they come. Here are John and Mary Shirley. Mary sadly passed away last year, but they gave the biggest gift for the park, and their gift, I think, was $25 million, of which $20 million went to endow the operations of the park. And that's how we could feel that we could take on another site, take on a whole other operation. It was because we had that endowment from them. So with a gift like that, of course, we offered to name the park the Shirley Sculpture Park, but they weren't interested in that at all. They suggested the name Olympic Sculpture Park. So it was a magnanimous gesture in so many different ways, and we are very grateful to them for their vision. So there were a few projects that we called infrastructure projects, and they were projects that were built into the fabric of the park. The artists were involved with the architects, and probably the most significant one in terms of function of the park is this work by Teresita Fernandez, who is, I think, of Cuban descent but works in Miami. And when you have a train and you have an overpass, you need a fence that will protect, it's called a throw fence, and so that people won't throw things over onto the train. And so our talented curator, Lisa Corin, who was working, planning the art program for the park, decided, let's turn that into an art opportunity. Rather than just have a functional bridge, let's make that something special. So she invited 5 artists to submit designs and selected this one, which is called Seattle Cloud Cover. It's this kind of perforated design of really gorgeously colored clouds. It's kind of ironic, these kind of pink, blue, yellow. Those aren't Seattle clouds, they're actually Miami clouds. But it's great when you're up there looking through downtown. It's actually one way to make the condominiums go away when you're looking south. But it makes a wonderful experience for the train riders going through the underpass as well. Another infrastructure project was this fountain by Louise Bourgeois. About the same time that we were building the park, we got a bequest from an estate from somebody that we had never heard of, $1 million to commission a sculpture that showed a male nude, which is a strange demand for a sculpture. So again, Lisa said, well, no problem, I can do that. And so she solicited proposals from 5 different artists, and we selected the one by Louise Bourgeois, who at that time I think was in her 90s. And this is one of the last things she ever did. It's based on a drawing that she made in the 1940s when her son was small, and it's about the kind of fraught relationship between parents and children. It's a fountain with 2 figures. Here's the father on the left reaching down to his son, and here's the son reaching up to his father. But as you can see, one of them is always covered up. And when this bell rings on the hour, the fountain switches. So they just miss each other. Except when the wind is over 10 miles an hour, then they're both uncovered, and I feel horrible about it. They're not supposed to. But she was so happy about that commission that she gave us a gift of these great eyeball benches, which she had made, which you may have seen in other places. I think Pittsburgh has a set of them. They are the best thing to sit on a sunny day, because the seated surface, which is on the other side, it's this beautiful soft black stone. It gets really warm and is just wonderful. So that's at one corner of the park. The pavilion is at the opposite corner, at the south end. And then just between those two is this structure, which kind of mimics the design of the pavilion building, and it's by the artist Mark Dion, who I believe came here and gave a talk, so some of you may have heard him. And he, you'll find as I'm looking at some of the artists who created work for the park, they were really interested in the relationship between art and nature. Artifice, nature, what is natural, what is art. And he made a piece that was all about that. So this is a nurse log. Do you know what that is? It's a tree that's fallen in the forest, and so it's lost its life, but it stays there and becomes part of the ecosystem of the forest floor, and gives life to new plants coming up. And so he went into different forests around Seattle trying to find just the right log. I think it's an 80-foot log. And you can see it's covered with moss and ferns. Actually, if you went to see it now, you can't even see the shape of the root ball here. It's just totally covered over with mature ferns. So he's brought this beautiful piece of nature into a very artificial environment. An environment that is climate controlled, that has cantilevers here that open up to let the thing breathe and adjust the moisture. And so again, you're thinking about art and nature and the relationship between the two. Here is Mark adjusting a fern. And this is before it's done, but he also then enlisted a number of Seattle artists to create beautiful tiles with botanical drawings of different specimens that you see here and insects that would live in here that now line the wall. And another view here, it has this little kind of study cabinet that you can open up and look at specimens and that kind of thing. And he's lined the walls with names of famous naturalists. So it's a real treasure. Patricia and I have talked about the fact that the frustrating thing is you need a docent to take you through, and you really have to come on a weekend if you want to see it. You can't just wander in. I'm sorry about that. And then there's an artist who was working in Seattle, but also worked nationally, named Roy McMakin, and he did a seating element down at the water's edge, and this is called Love and Loss. And it's one of the pieces that you can actually touch. That's a very confusing thing for visitors. A lot of people think if I come to the park, I should be able to touch everything and I should be able to climb on things. But a lot of the work we don't want you to, and that's a difficult message to convey. This is a piece, maybe even more difficult is to convey that this is a piece you can sit on and use. And this ampersand here, a kind of neon ampersand, rotates. So at night, when you go by, if you drive by or you're on a ferry or something, you can see this little rotating ampersand. And then you can maybe see that you have a kind of X-shaped design. He's using letters as part of the furniture. So here we have L, O, and then V is the double trunk of a flowering tree, and then E is the tabletop here. And then if you read it in the other direction, you have L, O, S, and then this little path becomes the final S. So love and loss, and again, using a living tree, which blooms and then drops its leaves and goes dormant as a kind of metaphor for cycles of love, cycles of life. That's probably the most popular piece in the park, that Love and Loss. And then this great work by Richard Serra, which he had already created, but which he worked very closely with the architects and with Lisa Corin in siting in the park. She initially the curator thought it should go down by the water because the name references the tides or the kind of water, motion of the water. But he wanted it sheltered. He wanted it away and actually chose the farthest northeast corner of the park. It's hard to get a good photograph of this, and I don't think I got you the best ones, but here's a view looking down. They're very foreshortened here. These are very long pieces of steel, and here's another view. And they are enormous. They reference the shape of ships. The title also references loss again, as in a funeral wake. He says. And he really wants the experience to be what happens to your body in relationship to their scale as you walk between them, as you look up at them. And I think it's a really great experience to experience them at the sculpture park because you first start up at the pavilion and you're looking down on them and they look very diminutive. You have all the authority over them. And then when you get down to their level and start approaching them, they are looming monumental shapes. Another very popular work at the park is this tree by Roxy Paine called Split. And he has done many of these metal renderings of trees. They're made of pipes and of all different diameters, and he puts them together to create these very believable trees. And so this one stands alone in the meadow, not too far from the pavilion, but you can see how its reflective surface makes it very much a part of any moment of the day. One of the favorite pieces in the park, and one of the best sightings, is this one by Claes Oldenburg and Koosje van Bruggen. We had to tell our younger visitors what a typewriter eraser is, but it's just wonderful. It rolls down the hill. Now this one doesn't belong to us. This is a long-term loan, and but we hope it will eventually become a gift because it's got such a nice whimsical character that it adds levity to the space. And this is a piece called Bunyan's Chest by Marc de Souvero from 1965. It's the first, he's a great American sculptor, now in his 70s. It's the first work that he was ever commissioned to make, and the people who commissioned it were Bagley and Ginny Wright, who are our great patrons. They commissioned it for their backyard, and it was originally something that their kids would climb on. And there was a swing attached to it at one time. Well, that, was exciting to us, but also really terrifying because it's a liability waiting to happen. So you can see the plantings under it are meant to put people off. They're kind of thorny and not very pleasant, but we haven't really had any problems. But what we do have now is rotting wood. So we have to replace these logs, and that involves working with his studio. We're going to get a Native American carver to make the log with his approval. And so it's been a multi-year process, believe it or not. Here's a work by Tony Smith that had been made earlier. You can see he first designed it in 1967-68, then it was fabricated after his death in 1999, and his widow gifted it to the museum. And it's a very architectural piece, as you can see. It's right across from the vivarium, Mark Dion's piece. And it looks very different when you come to the museum now because these trees have all grown up. So it's very much a private enclave. It's very exposed here, but that's not the way it feels now when you come in. It almost feels like you're in like an Egyptian structure or something. It's very, it's taller than you are, and it encloses you in a monumental way. And another work by Tony Smith called Wandering Rocks, which again looks quite different now because these trees, this is the aspen grove I mentioned, have all grown up around it. But the idea is that you would kind of come across them as natural forms as you're walking through the woods. On the right is what I consider a kind of, sad story, which is this fantastic sculpture by Anthony Caro, which we initially sited right outside of the pavilion on a terrace. And we finally had to take it down because it wasn't safe. We have lots of events at the park, and we have lots of rentals, and people were using it as kind of a jungle gym, and people were tripping over it and falling down to those steps below. And so we took it down, and we actually want to try to install it in our downtown museum again because it's a really fantastic sculpture. And then we haven't added a major sculpture since we opened the park. It's a massive undertaking. We're in a seismic zone. We have to engage engineers to do research about every potential siting. There are almost no flat areas. It's a very dynamic and sloping site. So we've been very conservative about that. But this last year we were offered a gift that made us say that we're ready to add one. And that's this great work by Jaume Plensa, who is a Spanish artist from Barcelona. And he made this work. Maybe some of you saw it when it was displayed in New York City in Madison Park in 2011. It's the face of a young Chinese girl that his family knew, but he elongates the proportions. She's about, I think, 45 feet tall, and just has this look of utter placidity on her face. It's called Echo to recall the nymph from classical mythology. So she is going to go in the sculpture park, and she will be right here. So this was, citing this piece, or citing any piece, is quite complicated. You may think you have room for lots more, but it's actually because of that issue of relationship with the other sculptures, it's very difficult actually to cite things. And this piece is so tall, and the donor of the sculpture, Barney Ebsworth, was very mindful of letting the eagle continue to be the icon of the park. He didn't, if we put it up here, this would really kind of take over. So we put it at the lowest point of the park. It's still, you will see it up from at this point here on the footbridge. But she looks out to the mountains, and I think will be very beautiful. We're really excited. She's being installed right now, a process that takes a number of weeks. So that's how the state of the park now, but we have also done a strategic plan anticipating some of the works that are going to come to us. So we've earmarked certain sites for certain pieces that we know will come to us in the future. So, of course, the main reason we're doing this is for our visitors, for the public. And one thing that we learned after a couple of years of operation is the park is after the first year, the park would be very quiet in the winter when the people aren't outside so much. It's kind of bleak. And so we really decided we would promote activities in the summer season. So we have park season. Our slogan was "Get Out." And we would start in June or late May and then go through Labor Day. And we programmed that pretty heavily. So Thursdays and Saturdays in particular have a lot going on. We have music, we have artists, we have activities for kids. And you can see, because also the nights are so long in the summer there, the sun doesn't go down till about 10. And so we want to allow people to really make the most of this setting. So here we bring food carts in, and we had a farmer's market stall set up one year, and we have really popular yoga classes that happen every Saturday morning. They're free, and so people just line their towels up and take over the terrace there. And then in terms of keeping the park lively, because we can't just add a massive sculpture at the drop of a hat, we came up with an idea to commission local artists to do something temporary for a park season. And so here is an example of some of the things that have been done. The one on the top right is actually not a local artist. This was the late sculptor Dennis Oppenheim, who lent us, I think, 8 of these gigantic traffic cones, and they were really funny. They just play with scale in such a funny way. So here you can see how little the eagle looks next to this gigantic traffic cone. But these were local artists who did amusing things with, I think we gave them $5,000 or something. So one of the pieces, this artist, Jenny Heischman, did several things, but this was the most popular one, just sticking an awning up on this expanse of concrete wall, and it suddenly became a domestic space. Another artist, Whiting Tennis, dumped a washing machine and a dryer in the meadow, so they had just been left there overnight. And then this other artist, whose name I can't remember, created these rainbow-hued ropes that you would kind of just find. You had to seek them out because they weren't making any mark on the horizon. And last summer, we gave all of the money to a single artist, Heather Hart, who is from Seattle but is based in New York, and she built this wonderful house that people could climb on, and you could actually go inside and have a window view out beyond. And so that was extremely popular because you could jump all over it, which people like to do. So the other thing that I will say is we rent the facility out pretty regularly. It's a very popular site for weddings, particularly in the summer. And then we ourselves have our biggest fundraising event of the year, the Party in the Park, which has become a wonderful social gathering, and it's an opportunity for artists and donors to mingle because we commission artists to create every single table. They will decorate every table, and then if a patron buys a table for the evening, the artist will join them. And it's great for the artists who don't usually get a chance to communicate with the patrons, and it's great for the patrons because they don't get that opportunity either. And we line the entire Z-path with these tables, and so it's just gorgeous, especially if it's not raining, which it hasn't for the last 2 years. Last year was the prettiest yet. So that's pretty much my talk. I just want to say you have a real opportunity here to you add to the gift that the museum already gives to your visitors, and I think that it's the kind of thing that will really be appreciated by people who bring their picnic lunches or just want to sit and look at the river. And I think ours is a kind of different order of magnitude, but the interaction of art and nature, I think, is one of the most appealing things to people, and it's also a way to get people interested in art and get them to come inside the building. So thank you very much for your attention. And should I? Yeah, if there are any questions, I'm happy to try to answer. Yes.
Enjoyed the art in your pavilion, that includes your office space. And you said they were in there for 1 year at a time, so you don't have to do the normal conservation thing. Are they on a media that can be transferred and resold, or does that stuff just lost?
It's pretty much just lost. I mean, there was one, the very first one, I didn't have a good slide of it, so I didn't show it to you. That came into our collection, and it was a series of kind of flat sculptural shapes that we could reconfigure elsewhere, so we could use it again. But most of them have been kind of a site-specific commission that doesn't, like the big drawing, that was part of her thing. She didn't want us to keep it. She wanted it to be gone. I don't know about the big hand. That was fabricated, so we could have sent that back to the artist. To be honest, I'm not sure about that. Any other questions? Yes?
You talked about you had 7 entrances to the park. What kind of security do you have?
Right. We contract with a private security firm, and they have an office below the pavilion, and they make bike patrols, and then there are cameras. So there's pretty good security, and we haven't had major incidents. I mean, we did have one drunk driver almost hit the fountain, mistaking it for a street, mistaking the sidewalk for a street. I saw that video, but for the most part, we haven't had major issues. But we do, maybe somebody will write their name on a sculpture or something like that. And so we also have a conservation staff that is dedicated to making regular rounds and making sure everything looks its best. And that is a huge issue. We're down by the water, so salt water is hard on some of the pieces that are closest to the water. The Roy McMakin piece has the table has water in it, and so people put things in that water that are unpleasant, that one of our conservation staff has to fish out. But I think the hardest thing for us was trying to be clear about what you can't touch and what you can touch, and people were really resentful when we had signs that said, "Please don't touch." They were really indignant. And, visitors who come to the museum, that's a self-selected group. But people who come to the park, there are many people who have never interacted with art before, so they may not know. And so it's just a whole different set of issues that you have to be gracious about. And we train our guards to be very polite and not confrontational. But it's a challenge. Yes.
Do you have a homeless issue?
Yeah, we have a little bit. That stinger, that big squarish piece, that's a cozy place to snuggle up. So yes, we've had some of that. But actually, the thing that has been the hardest on us is an annual event. I don't know if Wichita has anything like this, but in Seattle, which recently legalized marijuana, for years we've had Hempfest, which is held on the waterfront. What I didn't say when I was showing you the site is we abut a city park called Myrtle Edwards Park that runs along the waterfront. And so the Hempfest is held in Myrtle Edwards, but they use the path. They have moved logs and reconfigured the beach. So that's been really difficult. And we work with them. But it's always, if there's a chain link fence up, they'll push it down. So that's always a challenge, and it's coming up again soon. There was another question over here. Yes.
Would you walk your pathway if you started at the entrance building and went down all the way? Do you know how far that is?
Oh, I do. I wrote it down. It is 2,200 feet long, so not quite half a mile. And it's up and down, and then there are alternate paths, as I said. You can take stairs, you can come up the sidewalk. There are numerous different ways that you can see everything. Yes?
So what about the infrastructure problems of building overpasses over railroads and major highways?
What's the problem? Well, we actually got federal money for that train overpass because it was the train. I think with Seattle, because we're in a seismic zone, that's really the central infrastructure issue. Everything has to be engineered. Everything has to be secured to an unbelievable degree. And when we are installing that new Plensa piece that I talked about, it's 45 feet tall. It's fiberglass around an infrastructure of metal, but it has to go quite deep into the ground. Well, does it go below the land? You know, we have to. So all of that had to be checked before we could commit to that site. And so I would say it's the same for those issues. I don't know what the permitting issues and that kind of thing, but we had more government involvement than we've ever had with any other project. Because we're a private museum. We don't receive government funding except in a very tiny degree. So this was a new experience for us. Yes?
Thinking about seismic activity and the geology of the area, in your opening day picture, it showed a vertical cut below the highway, and think about the stability of that. And then look, later on, you planted a lot of trees that cover it up, but it won't stop there must be something done there, I assume, because the vertical cut under.
I wonder if, I'm going to go back and see if you can show me what, okay. Because some of these are taken with wide-angle lenses, so they sort of distort the angles. So I just want to make sure that I'm understanding what you're saying. Okay. So are you talking about this, or?
I'm talking about to the left, and maybe, yeah, that's
This is sloped, but it's not steeply sloped.
It looks vertical to me, but it's sloped. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I think this wide-angle lens is kind of making some things look steeper than others.
See now, thank you.
Sure. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
If you haven't been to Seattle in recent history, you really need to get out there. You stand in the middle of the park and you look across. There's the Puget Sound, and you see the Olympic mountain range. You can kind of turn around, and through high rises, you see the Space Needle, and the landscaping is exquisite, and they have the world-class art. It's really quite amazing. And thinking of amazing special works of art, someone in the fall left a little prize brooch behind. I'd say going, gone. It just was brought to my attention today. So, yeah, I was going to tell Steve English, that I'm sorry. He couldn't quite claim it, but neither can you, Larry. At any rate, if this belongs to any of you, or if you've heard of a friend who's missing a brooch, we have it here. And for just a minute or two, we want to hear from our Murdock guru, Tony Gates.
Well, first of all, wow. That's all I can say is wow. Our speaker, the sculpture park, all the sculpture in the park, all the fun things that they do in the park. Thank you. It was amazing. Okay, so far we've taken a virtual visit to Des Moines, and tonight we've taken a virtual visit to Seattle. But for our next gathering, we're coming back home. It's going to be about us. It's going to be about our museum. We don't have that sculpture park, but as you heard, we have plans, and we do have outdoor sculpture. So Patricia is going to lead the talk, and she is going to be homing in on Henry Moore. Why? Because his sculpture is one of the most prominent in our collection, and it's iconic. And how do I know that? I just asked Patricia. And when we gather on May 15th in-house, that is going to be an opportunity for us to ask Patricia a lot of questions. It's a little different format. It's much more informal. It's a chance for you to come, get involved, and really participate in the discussion. If the rain, the snow, the wind ever goes away, it might be a good time to step outside and actually take a good close look at the Moore sculpture. Okay, tonight, we said we would mix it up, and I think we are. Let's see. Chihuly coolers. I thought they were pretty color. River lobby, and with a little bit of tongue-in-cheek, goldfish snacks. So the fun is going to continue upstairs at Pike's Place Market. There are 4 stalls set up. When you go upstairs, wander around, look at what the different 4 stalls are, kind of think about what you want to have. I hope you want to have everything, but it's up to you. You can just visit them, and you can start any place you want to start and then have dinner. We are dining at, again, tongue-in-cheek, Harbor View Cafe, and it might be fun for you to mix it up too. You know, find somebody new to sit with, make a new friend. There's also a bar set up in the marketplace, so you can have anything to drink that you would like to. It is a cash bar. So we hope you will relax and, of course, enjoy. But before I wrap up, we had this idea. We got together. We thought about what we might want to do for tonight, visiting Seattle. I have to say that the staff has worked amazingly hard, many hours, put in a lot of good time to make what's happening upstairs happen. So I have to say thank you to everybody inside this museum. See you at Harbor View Cafe, and thank you for coming tonight to visit Seattle.